digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we have a full house for the first session of 2016 and we're welcoming back Steve from Amplified Robots, Ollie, who has now moved on from QWERTY Films and is heading up his own new project called Escape Plan, and Sanji from Halcyon. And we also have Hayley as our newcomer from Mass Challenge. Hello guys.
Hi there.
Oh, happy New Year.
Hi.
Happy New Year to you as well. Now, chaps, for those of you who have already been on the show, I'm going to start off with you to introduce yourselves and let our audience know exactly who you are and where you're from. I'm going to start with you, Ollie, because you've changed it up and may confuse some of our regular listeners.
I hope not. So I was working for QWERTY Films for nearly 4 years, and I was the head of production and development there. And I've now left to start my own feature film and television company, which is called Escape Plan, as you say. Mm-hmm. And starting a company like that basically involves doing an awful lot of work on spec, building up a slate of projects, which I am doing. But there is a kind of personal bias towards a kind of transmedia exploitation of intellectual property, which is the kind of sentence that sends most people to sleep, but not Digital Jam listeners, I hope.
Not at all.
So, for example, in the development of one of my projects, I'm looking at doing an origin story for one of the characters in a graphic novel. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking to connect with some games developers at the moment about trying to develop things alongside the development of the film rather than sort of retroactively shoehorn a game version onto a film.
Wonderful. And for our regular listeners, you will be hearing more from Ollie over the next few months about Escape Plan. But Sanji, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do over at Halcyon?
Yeah, so my name is Sanji. I'm the experiential producer at Halcyon. We were formed as a venture startup to explore and expand the role that technological innovation can play in communicating with today's new digital consumer. We're an award-winning studio that specializes in, new tech and emerging premium 3D digital experiences. Some of our client base includes people like Richemont, LVMH, the Swatch Group, the Kering Group, and we've installed some of our installations all over the world, including, London, Japan, the US, all over Europe. To give you a bit of background on me, I basically started work within the music business, developing an understanding of e-commerce and social trends within the web back in the late 90s. From there, I started to help digital startups and basically target the music industry professionals during the seismic shift of consumer habit evolution from physical products to digital. My exposure to luxury began when the head of music at Burberry approached me regarding the use of holographic technology for a show in Beijing back in 2011. And that showed over 120 million viewers live. And so from there, I've managed to work with some of the biggest brands in the world. My big claim to fame, I know Tanya mentioned it earlier, was that I was part of the team that worked on the Tupac hologram back in 2012, which won Titanium at Cannes and also broke digital PR records faster than anything before that fee. I'm also a lead singer in a political rock band, and I'm an Aries.
Thank you for that very thorough explanation, Sanj. Steve, why don't you tell us more about what you're doing over at Amplified Robot and perhaps a little bit about medical realities?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Hi, Digital Jammers. Yeah, I'm Steve Dan. I run a company called Amplified Robot, and we do everything in AR and VR space. We've been doing it now for about 8 years. We've won lots of awards during those 8 years, which is great. I also run 2 or 3 other companies, one of which is called Medical Realities, which is about using virtual reality for training doctors and surgeons. We also have another company called iRewards, which is for retail rewards in virtual reality and augmented reality. And I just started a new company called My AR, which is going to be something which is going to take off in the next 2 or 3 years. So that's literally where we're at now. We work for a lot of people. We white label for a lot of big brands, too numerous to mention. And it's a very exciting space to be in. We're always looking for new ideas and new things to get into. And I think today's discussion is going to be very interesting. interesting. I think it might give us a few ideas.
Wonderful. And of course, if you are interested in either AR or VR, it's always worth noting that, Steve, you run the VR meetup group in London. Isn't that right?
That's right. It's called Augmenting Reality. Augmenting with an ING, not augmented. And we meet the last Thursday in every month. Sorry, the last Wednesday in every month. We didn't hold one in December because that came up with Christmas. So next one's on the 27th of January. And I think we've got sold out already. I think we've got about 200 people turning up. So it's going to be a good start to the new year, I think.
Wonderful. And Hayley, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Mass Challenge and what you do at Mass Challenge?
Sure. So Mass Challenge is a global startup accelerator. We're the most startup-friendly accelerator in the world. We don't take any equity, and we're actually a not-for-profit. So we just work on supporting early-stage entrepreneurs from any industry. So we have a lot who are in media and ad tech, gaming, virtual reality. We even have a 360-degree piano hardware startup. We have a makerspace in Boston. So we really do everything under the sun. We've had 835 alumni startups from around the world over the past 5 years, and they've raised $1.1 billion. We're based in London, Boston, Geneva, Jerusalem, and we're also opening in Mexico City this year. And we're opening applications in February for any of the entrepreneurs who are interested in joining Mass Challenge. So I work on the marketing and PR side here in London, and I work very closely with a lot of our media and ad tech startups.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, guys. And today we were going to talk about the structure of the entertainment industry and what that's looking like going forwards. And one of the reasons that this came up was because there is this new emerging, what people are calling digital studio or virtual studios coming into play now, which is very different from the kind of established studio, like somebody like a Warner Brothers or a Fox, for example. But even then, it also is different from perhaps what people might consider as a bit more newfangled things like Netflix or Amazon, for example. So I'm curious to understand what we think the hybrid approach is going to be for, film and game studios or this kind of VR studios, perhaps, who are looking to really take the development process and also the entrepreneurship process in a slightly different direction. And Oliver, I think you probably are the most qualified person to speak about that in terms of you're going through this very process right now. So from your perspective, do you think that you are on the front end of a new wave of emerging studios, or do you think this is still very new and something that, only the brave will try?
Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, personally, I'm very much out. I'm on the edge of that wave. I mean, and film and TV generally, it's still lagging in this area. I mean, Netflix has now just this week announced that it's available in 130 more countries, I believe, and obviously that is a huge achievement. I mean, it's wonderful, really, because there's an aspect of a kind of populist thing that everyone in the world will have access to similar material. But it's interesting because we still haven't really worked out in film and TV exactly how the money will dissipate through the system in order to produce more and more for it. So Netflix, for example, what they do that's very interesting is that they don't publicize any of their viewing figures whatsoever. Even the people who are making the product that they are then distributing don't know what viewing figures they're getting. So they know exactly how much something is worth to them, but no one else does. So, their model seems to be mainly actually around acquiring quite a large amount of material, which they can be quite specific on their margins on. So selling something to Netflix doesn't necessarily guarantee you, endless wealth at all. And then they will invest very heavily into quite specific products like House of Cards or Making of a Murderer, which I'm halfway through at the moment and is amazing, which are kind of, in terms of they're moving on from the traditional television broadcaster slave to ratings model, because, for example, those sorts of things, even if not, they're not massively popular with all their viewers, they're very attention grabbing. So it's good for the branding of the company. But in terms of digital studios putting out, they don't really exist massively outside of the sort of animated area yet, I would say.
So when we look at people, and Steve, perhaps you've got something to say on this, but when we look at people like Verse, for example, who have really managed to establish quite a high level of investment to create dedicated content, that in some people's eyes might be considered as creating a studio, because they have a slate, they have content that they're creating, and they're distributing that in a very particular way. But do you think that this is going to emerge as a hybrid model where people are looking to utilize the structures that might have existed previously for film distribution, for example, but apply this to things like VR?
Well, I think VR is actually going to disrupt the whole system totally, because it's going to turn everything on its head. Because by utilising VR, you can actually go directly on a one-to-one basis with your product to anybody who's got a headset that you can reach out to. So the old sort of cinema system and the old sort of TV system is going to totally and completely change over the next few years. The exciting thing about virtual reality is, as you pointed out, it's a merger really of what in the past was film or television and gaming, because we're creating something new in a totally different environment. And I think we've only just got to see about how much sort of pent up interest there is in virtual reality by the fact that Samsung sold out of their new headsets, and also I think even Oculus have been surprised at the amount of people trying to get hold of their new consumer version of their headset. So I think in the next 2 years, it's going to give people a lot more opportunity to do a lot more different things, and to actually sort of create content which is designed to go and speak directly to people on a one-to-one basis. And that's going to be the different thing, because that's what you can do in virtual reality. It's very immersive, and to quote Chris Milk, who's the sort of leader at Verse, it's an empathy medium, and that's going to be a very exciting thing to get into. We've done a number of projects in sort of documentary filming and things very similar to what Chris is doing with Clouds Over Sidra and things like that, and that's proved to be incredibly popular. And also it's giving us ideas. Everybody's starting up. I would like to say right now we're at the same stage as film was over 100 years ago. It's really exciting, and the rules are going to change for everybody.
So I'm curious though, because from your perspective, obviously we talk about VR, and there is a common misconception between VR and 360. And when we talk about 360, we're talking about something that is fundamentally available on the mobile. And I'm curious from perhaps your perspective, Sanj, because you've done a lot more work with kind of mobile, whether or not you think that there is going to be this shift in the way that people are creating content and distributing that content and seeking to monetize that content for VR, for example. Because right now, at the moment, there is this very traditional model of I will commission content, I will distribute that content, I will make money on the tickets and the box office, or on home entertainment, etc. But when we look at something like VR, it really does straddle both of these kind of former molds, if you like, in as much as yes, you could go that route, and there are some people like Fox who are going down that route right now with VR, and even Samsung to a certain extent who have commissioned content to be made. But then on the flip side of that, you have this mobile ecosystem of apps being created specifically so you can experience 360 VR, whether that's the Star Wars experience, or Divergence experience, or any of these other movies or films, or indeed Verse, which is on the mobile. So I'm curious from your perspective, Sanj, whether or not you think that there is going to be more of a focus on this mobile commerce and economy before we see that emerge into more traditional true VR platforms and app stores.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very important question. And I feel it kind of the answer lies within this fantastic sort of evolution within the anthropological nature of the human being at present. The great thing about this digital revolution that kind of really started to take hold of the world 15 years ago is that it's really given an opportunity. Well, it's democratized the world in many ways, and there's lots of new artistic platforms that are appearing and allowing people to express themselves in unique ways, and that leads into virtual reality, which is something that people have been talking about for about 35 years now. However, it's only now that it's started to really sort of take hold, and the reason for that is because the technology is catching up. The lag within the VR world is starting to be, it's not obsolete, but it's starting to get, the processing out there is starting to handle lag a lot better. And everyone has really powerful CPUs now, that are in their pockets.
Okay. So from a content perspective, in terms of the way that we see the commercial structure working, do you think that it's going to be something that will challenge the existing school of thought, which is I will commission a piece of content to be made in the same way that, for example, a big brand might commission you to do a show, for example?
I think the status quo has been challenged for a long time, and it is because of the way that the habits of the user are evolving, especially over the last 15 years. There's always going to be big brands out there. There's always going to be small brands out there. There's always going to be people that are artistic, that want to use their volition to express themselves. And the great community we live in at the moment is there's so many opportunities for people to express themselves. And not just within VR, whether it's in film, which Ollie works in at the moment, whether it's music, whether it's painting, whether it's photography. I mean, Instagram is a fantastic success because it's just purely a way for people to express themselves visually, without having to say anything. And that's the world we live in, and that's going to change dramatically. And VR is going to be a part of that.
Okay. And Hayley, from your perspective, when we talk about this emerging structure for the entertainment industry and how people are going to be approaching this, we talk about people who have that approach or mentality of the traditional studio and how it's kind of advancing into digital distribution with people like Netflix or an Amazon, who are by some people's measure certainly far more mature than perhaps somebody who is really genuinely a new startup, somebody like Oliver, for example. But do you think that there is this culture, this mentality and approach of actually, I can create and I will create my own distribution approach to this, or I will identify and find my own audience?
Definitely. I would say that that's the biggest trend we're seeing right now at Mass Challenge. So a lot of our companies are actually doing platforms for content creation. So anyone who has a video camera or mobile phone can actually start creating content which they can sell through these platforms to big brands. So, for example, one of our startups is called Vidsy, and any filmmaker, whether that's a student or an experienced freelancer, can create short form content for big brands. So say Coca-Cola wants to commission something and it's only short form video content. They'll put out a description and a brief of what they want, and then any independent filmmaker can create that content, bid for it, and then get paid directly from that brand. So we have a lot of these sort of platform startups for facilitating the connections between independent content creators and larger brands. Even for YouTube stars, one of our startups is called Grapevine, and they put the YouTube stars in touch with the big brands. And it's this platform, because as an independent YouTube filmmaker or, video content creator, however you want to call them, will have a really hard time getting in touch with these large corporates. So what we're seeing now is this platform proliferation, and going back to Netflix and that kind of new way of developing content for longer form media production. We're seeing that same trend as well. So FilmDo is sort of like the Netflix, but for independent filmmakers. So they make long and short films from all around the world. They're very low budget, but it's a way for them to be known and to get discovered. And it's a different model than the Netflix model. So it's every film that is consumed online, you pay per film. So it's almost like a digital movie theater. In a way, you pay for the ticket of watching that film, or like an iTunes model rather than a streaming model. But with Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, they're really kind of becoming the new studios. So they're like the BBCs or the Channel 4s or the ABCs of the 21st century.
So I'm curious, because you've mentioned a lot of different approaches and a lot of different startups who are trying all these slightly different approaches to an old tune, if you like. I'm curious from your perspective, when you see these new businesses trying to establish their new market and trying to kind of justify that to an investor or, a wider audience of people, whether or not you think there is a receptiveness to that, or do you feel like the investors are still very reluctant to necessarily step into new and unknown territory?
Yeah, they've been doing incredibly well. So Grapevine, who does the YouTube platform, they started about 3 years ago in our Boston office, and they're global. They have big brands coming to them, really. I think what I'm seeing with a lot of our companies is that we work with large corporations as part of our not-for-profit model. So Visa, Unilever, American Airlines, they're all working with us. And they're really hungry for startups that can give them this innovation and this new access to content creation. So they find it quite difficult to find what's the hottest thing, what's really happening on the ground with their young market and the people who are on Netflix or Instagram, Vine, things like that. So they're really looking for startups to help them innovate and to help them create this relevant and genuine content that really speaks to their consumers.
That's good to know. And from your perspective, Ollie, when you emerge as a kind of a new studio who's trying to perhaps do something a little bit different, as you said earlier, when you kind of explained what you're doing and you said, hopefully that doesn't send people running. Obviously, the reason you're saying that is because there is a concern that it is a little bit too new and a little bit too different for, some people who are traditionalists in, your industry to necessarily want to get on board with that particular bandwagon. Do you think that this is something that inherently is a flaw for this kind of new startup that's going to be trying to challenge the status quo? Or do you think that it is that thing that's going to help push the rest of the industry forward into following you down that particular path?
I think part of the problem is simply money, really. The thing that there never is enough of in film, especially in the UK, is money. You're dealing with very, very, very expensive products where anyone who invests in them won't see any kind of return for probably about 2 years until after they put their money in. A diminishing market with increasingly tight margins. So really trying to get people to then focus on, a kind of game app for a phone or anything is very, very difficult unless you're saying, oh, well, by doing this, we're going to, I can show you concretely how this will increase the kind of the exposure of the project and how that will translate into people spending like £15 on a cinema ticket on a Saturday night, or how this will earn money that you can make the film off. I think that's part of the problem, that really what people in film are so focused on all the time is, it's great. Okay, well, we can get a bit of exposure, but, they're international products that are, it's like, okay, well, if this digital aspect can, if you can guarantee me 10 million views on YouTube, great, but, it's quite, I think in a way it's a problem of scale and it's a problem of cash, So until the model's been proved in some way, it's very, very difficult to get people really interested in it.
Do you not think that perhaps a franchise approach is really what needs to be articulated in this case?
Well, there are some franchise aspects. Something like The Walking Dead has been, is a great example. I think then though what you're dealing with is a certain degree of elevated risk. So with The Walking Dead, obviously that I believe started just as a graphic novel series and was sort of built piece by piece from there. And that's a model that people, are comfortable with. So if you were, starting something new like Divergent, for example, they have built that from the films, from the books, from the films, on and on and on. To invest multilaterally in a branded game, graphic novel, VR experience, film, all those different kind of things at once. It's such a massive undertaking that I think people are very nervous of that, and understandably, because actually, just to make Divergent film is $150 million already, plus $75 million worth of advertising. So, perhaps what you're looking at is trying to convince distributors and studios to invest more of their P&A spend in these digital platforms. But then you are, consigning yourself to the marketing aspect of a film that pre-exists. So that doesn't really answer your question. I think it's a very interesting response. They're moving. Things are moving, but it's going to be slow until people think, "Oh God, I can get $10 million together from doing this."
Well, I'm just curious from kind of what you're saying, whether or not, Steve, from your perspective, when you think about the commissioning of some of the content that you're doing with VR, whether or not there is still that sentiment that VR is kind of the nice marketing tool versus it is actually a content platform. It is a distribution platform of its own. Do you think that's still very prevalent as an attitude at the moment?
I think that's true, and I think it's changing very quickly, and I think that there's going to be a lot of sort of hybrid things that will happen. For instance, I think people will start to sort of at the high end make feature films or games which are totally compatible with VR as well. So you could actually sort of view them in the cinema or play them as a game, but also they can be transformed into VR or 360 experiences as well. I think prime example of this is the thing that 20th Century Fox are bringing out with The Martian, where they're actually now sort of creating a virtual reality version of it. And we know that sort of Marvel have actually sort of been dipping their toe into the water with Avengers in 360 and virtual reality as well, because a lot of films now have such a high content of sort of CGI content which is already created. So that sort of films in themselves, quite often, certainly those sort of blockbuster ones, actually have a very high sort of special effects content, which is usually pretty well transferable into the virtual reality domain as well. But there's also going to be a sort of separate thing because you've got that on the film side and also on the gaming side. But I think that YouTube is already starting to disrupt what happens in normal sort of television, television distribution. But also, it's also the distributors are actually starting to look at how they can get a really firm foothold in the 360 and VR market. In the same way that the Oculus are actually wanting to build up a whole load of content for Oculus Rift. Also, Sony are doing this as well. So now Sony sort of straddles every single which way. It straddles games, it straddles films, it straddles TV, and now it's also going to straddle virtual reality in 360. So I think that in the high end, there's going to be the studios that are actually sort of get it, are actually going to be in there and actually have a very, very good chance of, in actual fact, sort of corralling a lot of the market for themselves. But as somebody mentioned earlier, that now also that virtual reality can be very democratic. You can democratize actually distribution as well via YouTube, but also companies like Little Star, which is actually a distribution platform for virtual reality. Now, Little Star actually happened to be backed by Disney. So, you're looking at a lot of the big studios or TV companies are actually looking to get a very large chunk of the VR market right now, because it's going to take a while for it to shake out. As with all new things, as I say, we're entering into uncharted territory. So all bets are off, but also bets are on as well.
Sanji, from your perspective, you're working with a lot of these big brands who are commissioning to do a little bit of VR or to play with new technology because they can. But do you think that there is going to be, something new that changes the attitudes in terms of this isn't just a PR stunt anymore? There's actually a content story I want to tell. Do you think that's something you're going to start to see emerge with the big brands that you're working with?
I think the answer is no. VR is it's a fantastic platform, but within the luxury sector, there's a long way for it to go before it can tick their boxes. And I think the problem we have with VR at the moment is we've got fantastic technology, but we've got really, really shitty storytelling at the moment. There's the narratives aren't they're not compelling. They're not exciting, and also the experiences. Some of them are quite uncomfortable. I know I mentioned to you this before, Tanya, but I when I was at the Frankfurt Motor Show, every car brand there had a VR headset, and every time I would sort of walk around there, 70% of them smelt like vomit because people were having a few drinks and then they were putting on a VR headset and they were feeling sick. And that no brand wants a consumer to feel sick after they've just experienced an experience that's got their name on it. So there's still a long way to go. One of the guys that we work with who, he's been working with VR, as I said, for 30 years, he's still trying to, test experiences. So, we've got these setups where people will put on a VR headset and, some of these experiences involve you being burnt and how you react to that motion. And the reality is humans need to feel like they're in that space. And it's not just what you see, but it's what you think and what you feel. And the narrative is a huge aspect of that, but other things as well, how you move and stuff. So, sitting in a car, you've got, G-force that's kind of repelling against your body. And if you're not getting that, your mind is going, well, hold on a minute. I can see myself going 100 miles an hour, but actually my body doesn't feel like that. So that doesn't make me feel comfortable. And that type of psychology, understanding that type of psychology is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take years and years of development. But as I said, the technology's there and it's getting better. And there's lots of fantastic talent out there that are making these experiences, and they're going to learn a lot from those experiences. And soon we're going to start to hit a paramount moment where these creatives are starting to get it right and start to create these experiences that are right, not just for the consumer, but also for these brands that want to invest in those experiences.
Like Sanji's saying, it's still that kind of promotional area. And like Steve said, when you look at film, when it was first invented, it was very much what we might now term a kind of experiential thing, with Voyage to the Moon or that kind of thing. The narratives that were involved were quite basic and actually a bit like, say, the stuff that's on Little Star. A lot of it is sort of documentary based. The attraction of film was that you could go anywhere, capture it on celluloid, bring it back and show it to the people. So a lot of it was kind of location based or showing, Queen Victoria's funeral or, all those kinds of things. and narrative built very, very slowly. So if you look at, for example, the first ever Western, The Great Train Robbery, which is 1903, I think, that, you know, it's basically a chase, the whole thing, more or less, you know, even though it's the kind of the first Western, and there's narrative and there's characters and, you know, there's stuff going on. And actually even the phrase cut to the chase is a reference from the early days of film, where filmmakers wanted to have, you know, more complex narratives and character-based drama. But actually what the people wanted was for you to cut to the chase, get to that chase scene as soon as possible, because that's what people really liked in film. And it took a long time for film to really move beyond that.
So I put this to you then, Oliver. Do you think that perhaps the nature of modern society and the way that we as a culture approach this new medium as it's emerging is that actually we're very impatient with VR? We don't have the patience. You know, back in the day, we had the patience to watch things like, you know, TV and radio and all these other formats emerge and mature and grow into what they became. Whereas with VR, it feels an awful lot like actually we're very impatient, and we are assuming that it will have the maturity of these other formats way before its time. Do you think that's possibly the case?
Possibly we as well, I say we in the loose, because I don't produce, but as in people who produce it or who are involved in making it will be impatient to get to that point, perhaps. But in terms of the audience, I think actually it's a little more romantic than that. I think it's, if you look at the origins of photography, the origins of film, the origins of sound recording, everything, you know, we kind of invest actually in the magic of it first. And while it's still this relatively esoteric thing that we don't quite know how it's made, and we don't quite understand even how we're seeing what we're seeing, like happened with photography and film and whatnot, we're sort of so invested in the magic of it that we can't quite grapple with the narrative yet, because we're not used to it. And, you know, something like photography, for the first 30 years of photography, it was a sort of magical man with his magical lantern, you know, sort of showing us these pictures. It took a long time before people were familiar enough with it to sort of start owning it themselves, you know. And that's the same with film. It's not really until, you know, the mid-20s that long form dramas are being made, by which point film is, you know, 30 years old. So I think it takes us in a way, I think we're quite awe-inspired. It's perhaps, you know, a way of looking at it. And it, you know, it just takes that democratization, that familiarity, that mass consumption, that being used to seeing it before you can sort of grapple with something like a sophisticated narrative, you know. Because if, you know, I put on a VR headset, I'm blown away. You know, I don't care.
You're not cynical yet.
No, I'm not, yeah, exactly. I'm not cynical yet. I'm not like, yeah, okay, very good. Now entertain me. You know, in a way, I don't need story yet, because I'm still just, oh, this is amazing.
I think it is happening, the democratization of virtual reality with the invention of Google Cardboard. So all you really need is a 5-pound headset that you put on top of your smartphone, and then you're transported back in time. You are in a car chase, in a game. So this is already happening. One of our startups is called Time Looper, and it takes you back in time where you're standing in the middle of Trafalgar Square, and then you put on the Google Cardboard and you turn around and it's in the middle of the Battle of Britain. So I think that is actually happening quite fast. And I agree with a lot of the points you made, Oliver. But there's still this sort of YouTubeization of media, and I think the VR is catching up quite quickly with this Google Cardboard headset.
I find this interesting because you're talking about the Google Cardboard, or you're talking about the cardboard as a, you know, a VR medium. And Steve, I think for folk like us who've been around this for a little while now, when we talk about VR, I think there are some schools of thought that are still quite specific about the fact that, you know, there is true VR and then there is 360, and these are two very, very different things. But I think there is, a point where we have to acknowledge that actually the majority of the mainstream consumer is going to experience VR in the form of 360 through a cardboard device or a mobile device of some sort. Do you think that this causes inherent problems for the VR industry further down the line when we try to explain those differences between 360 and VR? Or do you think it's just a case of, that's great, let's get people in, let's get them on that first kind of, touch point entryway into VR and let's educate them later?
Yes, I think that sort of things like Google Cardboard is entry level, and it's a stepping stone into 360 and virtual reality. And I think I think people were very quickly, after having tried Google Cardboard or something similar, will want to try and see, right, okay, I get this, but how far can it take me if I sort of step up into sort of more sophisticated viewing devices like the Samsung Gear, and then onto the Oculus or the Sony PlayStation VR, or to the HTC headset. But I think that's where they ultimately want to go. So I think the Google Cardboard's quite a good sort of taster of actually sort of getting into what it's going to be like in looking at 360 or virtual reality. But to ultimately get the experience, it's going to be the same as watching something. Yes, you can watch a film on your a normal film on your mobile phone or your tablet, or you can see it on the television screen, or you can see it on a big screen in a cinema or the IMAX screen. It's going to be lots of different ways you can take it, and some people will want to see things in sort of bite-sized chunks. Some people will want to go and have the full Monty and go and sit down in a luxurious place and just sort of let the VR experience wash over them. I think what Oliver was saying was actually sort of spot on, because I've been looking at certain quotes from people like Werner Herzog, the film director, who's saying that at the moment, for instance, he doesn't believe that people can take long-form virtual reality, and he thinks that probably around about 8 minutes is the ultimate immersion that anybody can take if they're looking at something which is sort of put together, because he thinks that virtual reality can actually have such a strong impact on your all your senses that it becomes you get overloaded. But as Oliver was saying, with a lot of these things like film evolved, virtual reality and 360 is going to evolve, and we're just right at the very start of what's possible now. But even then, it's actually mind-blowing the number of things that you can do with it already, and the ideas that people are coming up with.
Okay, but going back to the original question in hand, do you think it's still a problem that there are some people who want to separate out 360 from VR?
I think they're the same thing. It's it's the same coin. They're just different faces of the same coin, different sides of the same coin. So whereas yes, the sort of virtual reality as opposed to 360 is going to be an all-encompassing medium, which will actually have probably other tactile features to it as well as visual features. 360 is just viewing something that's been shot in 360 mode or 180 mode, and actually looking at it, for want of a better word, in seeing it through a part of a big screen. But I don't think we should worry about, is it just filming reality, or are we creating something completely new from scratch? As I say, I think that it's exactly the same coin. It's just different size. Let's not get worried about is 360 true VR or vice versa.
Wonderful. Good. Hopefully our listeners, the people who were debating on this topic, now have an answer. But guys, I'm curious, and I'm going to start with you, Sanj, on this one, because I think you've got the most practice at coming up with an answer to this. But I'm curious as to what you think is going to be the most significant change that's going to occur for your industry, that's going to really change the way that you do business. And this is irrespective of technology, whether it's a cultural trend, whatever that shift is that you think is going to happen. What do you think that big thing is going to be? And nobody on this call is allowed to say VR, because we have spoken about VR enough today.
Do you know what? There's lots of new things that are out there. I'll highlight a few. I mean, one of the things which I'm really excited about is this new, this kind of second wave Bluetooth revolution that's going to kick off in the next few months. Apple have announced that the next iPhone is not going to have a headphones jack on it, so that all the headphones that you'll have to use with it will be a Bluetooth device, and that's kind of Apple, one of those brands that really knows how to make things desirable through their marketing, etc. I think that's going to be a kind of interesting game changer in the next sort of 9 to 12 months. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is going to be the first film that is going to be shot with the Red 8K camera. So it's going to be one of the first movies that's going to be filmed with more pixels than ever before, which I think is going to be a big game changer because it's going to appeal to such a mass audience. And one of the problems with VR and 360 films is the pixels ratio is the count is so low, and for it to catch up with that 8K kind of visual experience that a big movie like Guardians of the Galaxy is going to be pushing is quite an interesting thing to talk about within film. And then the last thing, and it's something that I really noticed at CES this year, is the Internet of Things has really started to make an impact in the consumer world. There's more. Everyone's been talking about fridges that tell you when food's going off, and send you a text and stuff, which I think is really vulgar. But there's lots of new devices that are coming out there, like vacuum cleaners that vacuum clean your house when you're not in, and sort of go back to their parking station to charge themselves. But you can also watch this vacuuming from your phone and control it via your phone, which I know sounds really bizarre, but that's an interesting thing that's going into the consumer space and is really starting to empower consumers in new and funky ways.
Okay, interesting. Oliver, what's your take on this?
All I want is my front teeth, by which I mean all I want is a reliable, strong, healthy internet connection. And I think that'll help enormously, because I went on holiday to Northumberland recently, which I highly recommend. It's absolutely stunning part of the world. And the number of BT operators I saw on the moors working on internet, broadband cabling was extraordinary. And I think we've still got a little bit of a kind of, problem with that, even in the UK, one of the richest countries in the world. And all these emerging technologies are brilliant, but they rely on a certain level of kind of hardware, if you will, in the community. So I think when that takes off, and it's like Haley was saying about, you're standing in Trafalgar Square and, you can have the Battle of Britain, where, I mean, it sounds amazing. I'd love to try that. But do I need to have it pre-downloaded? When are we going to have, internet connections that mean that we can just, like that? When are we going to have such cheap and reliable access to fast internet that we're going to be able to exploit these things? So I was very excited to see this new Wi-Fi through light that's being
the
developed.
new Li-Fi. That's
Li-Fi.
That's what they're calling it.
Which looks like it's potentially to internet connection what nuclear fusion is to energy production. It sounds like it's the answer to all our problems. And
isn't that the same with every new technology though? Don't they always say that? It's gonna solve everything.
Yeah. Maybe Li-Fi will, turn us into vampires who can't stand natural light or something. I don't know. There'll be some unseen thing or some kind of unseen fear that I will then try and develop a clunky horror movie around and exploit everyone's deepest, darkest concerns. But yeah, that's what I want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And what about you, Hayley? What do you think will be the most significant thing that's really going to impact what you do as Mass Challenge and the entrepreneurial kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, so what I'm seeing now is really incredible technologies coming out of developing countries and places like China, Africa, Latin America. It's really amazing to see their completely different perspectives from what has traditionally been the technology powerhouse in the United States. Even Europe is really taking off now, where it was maybe behind the United States before. It's really becoming a leader in its own right in the technology space now, especially London. And I think the diversity of technology and entrepreneurs and startups and the different places that they come from really shape the technologies that they develop. And I think we're going to see some really amazing things that we didn't expect. So we'll see a few black swans come up, and I'm really excited to see where it all takes us.
Interesting. And do you think that the nature of the world that we live in and it becoming such a small place nowadays and the fact that we are kind of getting closer and closer almost because of technology, do you think that's going to start to maybe diffuse some of that diversity and some of that innovation and different thinking if we're all so close together thinking in the same ways?
Definitely. I think we're already seeing that. So whether you go to a nightclub in Hong Kong or a coffee shop in LA, you hear a lot of the same film, or you hear a lot of the same music, and you see a lot of people watching and streaming the same films and using the same apps and things like that. So something that right now is developed in the United States is beamed out instantly around the world, and really any new technology that is successful can take off like wildfire. So I think we'll start seeing a lot of changes shifting from the United States to really coming from anywhere, which will be exciting.
Okay. And Steve, what about you? What do you think is going to be the big significant change? And you're not allowed to talk about VR.
That's been quite difficult then.
You still have AR.
Yeah, I was going to say AR. I think AR is going to be, sort of taking off in the next few years. Again, it's going to require various things. I think that Oliver was mentioning internet and connectivity, and I think that's sort of the key to where everything is. It's a sort of that if you go to some places like Singapore and you get some, then you see what it could really be like if you have actually really super fast internet and connectivity. That's something that we should aspire to in the UK, definitely, because that's going to be something which will drive a lot of things forward as well. But I think sort of wearable technology in that goes hand in hand with augmented reality. So you can actually wear something and be proud to wear something on your head that isn't going to sort of draw derisive laughs from other people in the street. That you can actually sort of wear, but also you can get information being directly to you all the time. Mm. I see sort of glass manufacturers like ODG and people like that doing some very interesting things in that space. And then together with something that is going to be very useful to a number of things that we're doing, are sort of haptic feedback devices, because I think that's actually something which is actually going to push things forward tremendously in the next few years. Okay, so for some of our listeners who may not know what haptic means. Haptic feedback is, well, that's when actual fact you feel what you're doing. So that in actual fact that you can actually sort of reach out in front of you and actually touch something, actually feel something that's could be something that appears to be floating in front of you, like a keyboard. And when you touch the keyboard with your fingers, you actually your fingers feel as though they're actually touching real keyboard. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on this Digital Jam session. Now, normally we would ask you to share with us your social media handle of choice so that our listeners can follow you, figure out what you're up to, and keep an eye on what changes emerge within your industries. So I'm going to start with you, Sanj. What would be the social media of choice for you?
Best one to get me on is get me on Twitter, which is at Sanj Surati, which is SanjSurati, or you can get me on at Holition, which is at Holition, HOLITION.
Wonderful, thank you. And Oliver?
Twitter's probably best. I'm imaginatively called at Oliver Castman with a K, and yes, that's the best place to find me. Okay,
and Hayley, what about yourself?
Yeah, you can find me through Twitter as well. It's at Mass Challenge UK, and that's MASS, not Mass Challenge.
Thank you. And Steve, what about your good self?
Yeah, well, I've got two today, Tanya. I've got AR Reality, that's ARREALITY, and also my other one, which is Berwick Post, that's BERWICKPOST. That's my larger one. I've got about sort of 5,000 followers on that, so we do a lot of stuff in AR and VR space on that. So feel free to jump in and talk to me on that. That'd be great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining us once again. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. But thanks again for joining us on this Digital Jam session. digitaljamsessions.com